Let's stay with the story and speak to KwaZulu-Natal University Civil Engineering Academic Leader, Professor Mohamed Mostafa, and UCT Civil Engineering Department Lecturer, Gundo Maswime. Good afternoon, and thank you so much to you both for your time. I'll begin with you, Prof. This is a province that had been battered by floods, the unrest, and these left a trail of damage to infrastructure. Just how much of a setback is this likely to be for KwaZulu-Natal as it looks to rebuild?
In fact, the assessment of the current destruction is not well known at the moment. However, from the footages and videos coming from all media resources, it looks like it's not as bad as it was last year, and it is more of localized damage and damage happening in more of residential areas rather than to the main infrastructure itself. So it shouldn't be a huge setback. However, of course, budgeting for emergency reliefs and for repairs and for maintenance is a burden for the current KZN budget, which is, I believe, not at the required level.
Especially because the mayor is saying that insufficient funding is becoming, in fact, is the main challenge that has led to delays in rebuilding infrastructure that, was damaged by the floods in April last year. So this means that, of course, a lot of damage that would have been caused is still there and the costs keep piling up. Do you think, Gundo, they will manage?
Yes, thank you. I don't think for the mayor of eThekwini municipality, the issue can be characterized as more of a shortage of funds, but it goes into municipalities like Ugu district and KwaDukuza as well, where the real challenge will not be funds. When we had the disaster last year, though most of the mayors were saying that they need funds, informally, there are some engineers that approached provincial government and national government to say that we are struggling to manage the current projects that we are running, the current infrastructure projects that we are running. So this is going to be an add-on to a problem of capacity that we already have. So I don't think the limiting factor here will be just the funds. I think also the capacity within the municipalities will be a challenge, because eThekwini municipality has got more engineers than the whole of Limpopo and Eastern Cape combined. So you can assume that they will probably have the capacity to try and remedy the situation, but it's not the same for KwaDukuza, it's not the same for Ugu district.
So what does that mean then to someone, Gundo, who's watching today? You say that, of course, there are these engineers, there is that issue of money, there is the issue of the differences in some of these areas. So what does all of that then mean to a resident who's watching, wondering?
I think for the resident, it will mean that where there are disruptions in, for example, water supply and so on, at least for now, they have not completed the full assessment of the damage. But for a resident to understand that from the previous damage, there are people whose roads have not been fully restored. If you go down to the south coast, it will mean that when they make their plans, they must have a long-term view of the possibility that the government might not be able to restore everything as quickly as they would want to. And it's not only because of the shortage of funds, it's also because of the lack of capacity.
You get the same sense, Prof?
That's correct. However, there are so many other factors which will come into the game, like what philosophy is the municipality and the government is taking into repairing and fixing the damages. In fact, I was talking early this morning about resilient infrastructure. So currently that concept is not considered by the government. So retrofitting repair is not part of what municipalities are doing. And it means simply that the target is to restore the status quo. And it means that if there is another event soon, we will have more damage and more damage. So we need to not only consider the available fund and the available capacity, but also the approaches we are using to repair the damage. So we need to look into introducing materials which are capable of resisting the floods and the other weather, extreme weather conditions. We also need to think, when we are building new infrastructure, of applying the concept of resilient infrastructure. And this is beyond sustainability. It takes more than what sustainability is. And in fact, the government is still looking into how to implement sustainable infrastructure. And they are not yet at that point of thinking beyond that. And it's too late. We need to start acting, not thinking. And there is a need to take actions. And I think what's happening in KwaZulu-Natal is a good pilot study. Yes, it is devastating, and everyone is sad, and we convey our condolences to those who, to the families of those who lost their loved ones. But it is a good pilot study from the engineering perspective that we start looking into applying the concepts of sustainable infrastructure and beyond, which is the resilient infrastructure.
Now, Gundo, when you then look at, just the plans that would be put in place, for example, we'll hear from the national government to say these are the plans that have been put in place when it comes to infrastructure and the spend thereof. And then there's the province, and then there's the municipalities. And the municipalities are always at the cold face when it comes to issues of service delivery. But there appears to be some gaps when it comes to implementation and speaking to one another. How then do they begin to breach that divide in order to be able to make sure that what is said at the top filters down to the bottom, especially when it comes to infrastructure maintenance and build as well?
Yes, the framework is very comprehensive and very elaborate, and it goes down to district level, the disaster management framework. But its strength is on the processes that need to be followed to release the funds that must then be used for the rebuilding. But now, taking it from there's the issue of capacity, there's the issue that Prof is referring of the building resilient infrastructure. We have got the National Home Builders Regulation Council, the NHBRC. We have South African national standards. There are two standards that go into detail on even the spacing, the type of nails that need to be used. SANS 10160 it goes into the kind of loading and so on. But the houses that people are building are not complying with that, especially in the townships such as Phoenix, which is affected, Bambai, Mahoti, Maotana, that whole area around Indanda. So, unfortunately, you have a full framework that says who must do what. At the end of the day, the implementation must be done by somebody. When the municipality is over capacity, that means there's a challenge. Hence, the South African, the MISA, which is part of COPTA, has put a suggestion on the table that the government needs to set up its own construction firm for times such as this, or even its own civil engineering design firm, so that engineers can move in quickly without having to go through the rigors of the procurement system, and then start doing the work. I think that will be the way. That will be the best way forward. The framework is there. The problem is the capacity.
Prof, how much does the impact of climate change further complicate the picture here?
It does complicate the picture because climate change is not a local event or a short-term event. We live with climate change because of the carbon emissions worldwide. And it is affecting the whole world, and attention is given to it by all countries at the highest level, which is the presidents and leaders of all countries. Are we doing enough to mitigate the effects of climate change as a world? We are not, and therefore the effects will be there for long term. So what we need to do is to take them into consideration. And from engineering perspective, as I mentioned, that there are so many philosophies and design concepts which have taken climate effect and climate change effects into consideration, and resilient infrastructure is just one of them. So It is complicated, but at the same time, from engineering perspective, the theory is there, the application is there. Now it's the availability of funding and availability of the political will to consider such mitigations.
You agree, Gundo?
Yeah, I fully agree. I think the gap between research and implementation has to be closed, especially in our case. There's a lot of research that is done in civil engineering materials and so on. But most of the research, even some of the researchers, unfortunately, are publishing for journals in Europe and elsewhere where they are being implemented. But in South Africa, that gap between the state and the universities has made translational research to be much more difficult to do. So for that reason, we are actually being left behind. So Prof is correct to say that all these philosophies that are coming to the fore in the design and research space, we need to begin closing that gap, and we will be able to do that by government working more closer with institutions of higher learning, with research institutions, even TVET colleges, because these are instances where you could mobilize all those unemployed carpenters and so on, and then work with them and restore the damaged infrastructure.
All right, so let me thank you both for your time this afternoon. Do appreciate it. That was KwaZulu-Natal University Civil Engineering Academic Leader, Professor Mohamed Mostafa, and UCT Civil Engineering Department Lecturer, Gundo Maswime. Thank you so much to you both.